Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host. And joining me tonight is Kyle McDaniel. And if you haven't heard of Kyle, you probably haven't read the Washington Post lately, because Kyle made headlines when he decided to step down from his position in the Republican Party of Virginia's Central Committee. Thank you, Kyle, so much for being here.
Sure, thank you for having me.
So I don't have too many in my personal circle who end up with their name on a Washington Post headline. Of course, I read the digital version, so there was your name, and I'm like, hey, I know that guy. And so why is it big news that such a promising young man who had so many prospects, Pat Harity is quoted in the article as saying that he fully expected you or expects you to run for office someday, it was headline making. Was that a surprise to you?
It was a little bit. When I made the decision to not only resign but to make it a public letter of resignation, I knew that there would be a little bit of media play. I did not expect the extent of media play. I assumed the Washington Post and maybe a couple of local outlets would pick it up. Was I expecting calls from major news networks for interviews? No, I certainly wasn't. But I replayed the day over and over again in my head. I replayed writing the letter and clicking send on the email. I think it's 3 weeks tomorrow. And I keep replaying that moment over and over again in my head and trying to think, was it the right decision? Was it the right decision? Was it the wrong decision? And even though I have the benefit of hindsight, I still would have made the same decision because it was the right decision to make.
I think one of the things that impressed a lot of people is that you have a tremendous amount of credibility for somebody so young. And young is a spectrum, as
Sure.
you and I both know.
Sure.
The older you get, the younger everybody seems, but you're 28 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and you have done a lot of things in 28 years, including working in Fairfax County government and working with Pat Harity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you gained a lot of experience, you clearly impressed a lot of people. You got an important position in the state committee, and how you conducted yourself, I think, caught people's attention. Was not bitter, it was not acrimonious, it was in fact quite mature, well thought out, and you made reasonable points. Tell us a little bit about what some of those points were. Sure.
Well, one of the things that I was raised on and I've tried to apply to my life is you've got to have your principles and you've got to stick to those principles. And as uncomfortable as principles can be to stick to, you have to do that because that's your reputation. That's what you are as a person. So I really approached everything that I've done in local politics or just in life in general from that perspective. And that was one of the reasons that I made the decision that I made. I know that it obviously upset some people, and some thought that I should not have made it public. But there's a difference between, just kind of resigning and going quietly into the night versus resigning and saying, these are the exact reasons why I made the decision to resign. And had I not done the latter and instead done the former, that would not have been sticking to my principles.
And is there a message in this about what you consider to be the core values of conservatives?
Sure, and it's been said over and over and over again by a lot of people that have a lot more credibility than me that, the party I didn't leave the party, the party left me. And I think there's a certain degree of truth to that. People, over time, they evolve, they change. Just your daily consumption of information, it affects your views and your beliefs and to a certain extent your value system. But the party is going through a change, it's going through an evolution. Some would argue that it's a good change and a good evolution. I'm on the side saying that it's not a good change. There are those, the traditional definition of conservatism, small government being the big one. It is that, but it's no longer that. I mean, that's a part of it, but it's not the main guiding principle of what it means to be a member of the Republican Party anymore. And that's the most unfortunate part that I found in this entire saga was that, those who have recently come into the party fold over the last couple of years, no longer view limited government, even in its most uncomfortable fashion, or its most, if it doesn't benefit them, they know they're willing to let that go and to embrace large government. And I just fundamentally disagree with that.
And so, is there a bridge too far? I think, looking at it from a different perspective, since I'm not a conservative, although I think we share a lot of similar values, but the fact of the matter is there a line that will ever be crossed by this president? Is there a point at which Republicans will say that is a bridge too far? That is really unacceptable, because we haven't found it yet.
Sure. I mean, in 10 years of political involvement, I've learned to never say never, but I'd be shocked if there was a line that was crossed that was unacceptable, or, as you characterize it, a bridge too far. A lot of things have happened that this president has done, this administration has done, that, had George W. Bush done it, for example, or had Barack Obama done it, those on the right would be screaming bloody murder. And for some reason, if Trump does it, well, he did this, or he meant to do this, or this is just his deal making, or we're not tired of winning yet, or whatever the talking point of the day is. And I don't know if it's because people have forgotten their principles, or if it's simply because people have gotten so caught up in the 24-hour news cycle of constant bombardment that truth is relative, and facts don't really matter, and it's just whatever your opinion is all that really counts.
It's funny because the Washington Post quoted or reprinted a quote from Haley Barbour, the former legendary Republican from Mississippi, the Mississippi governor, who said, politics is about addition.
Right.
And so, it seems like the Republican Party is not necessarily interested in who they're bringing in or who they think they're bringing in. As far as young people, everybody wants young people.
Sure.
I mean, the Democratic Party is looking for how do you engage young people. You're a young person and they just lost you. Going forward, do you think there will be other young people who will find that this is just no longer something, these things are things they cannot support? Is that a generational thing, I guess, is the question?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm from Mississippi, and I've had the good fortune of being the governor a couple of times, and he's always full of, very down-to-earth, very simple ways of getting a point across. And he's absolutely right. You can't, you have to add people constantly to your tent, and that's the entire notion of a big tent. The Republican Party has a demographic issue, and the voters under 40, I'd characterize, is a massive demographic issue of the Republican Party, and there are statistics constantly quoted about how this generation in the droves is leaving the Republican Party and are not voting for Republican candidates. And I say the party in Virginia, we don't have registration by party. We don't go to our electoral board and say I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, or I'm an independent. So when I talk about the Republican Party, what I'm really meaning is people that will vote for Republicans in a consistent, regular fashion. And therein lies the problem for the Republican Party in Virginia going forward, is they're losing those under the age of 40, and the demographic numbers are a staggering challenge for them.
Well, so I'll tell you what I saw on Election Day in Fairfax City, working 3 different polls that I've never seen before this past November, and that was families. I have never seen, in the pouring rain, in the freezing cold, after dark, moms and dads with strollers, with babies, with toddlers and rain boots. They came from morning to night, and I have worked the polls in Fairfax City for years and years, since 2008, every primary, every election. That's when I knew this was something different. I have never seen families with children come out in those numbers before.
Right.
You're kind of right in that demographic. Is the Republican Party losing families, and particularly working families?
Sure, no, I think so. And especially here, Fairfax County, Northern Virginia in general, it's educated, it's diverse, it's wealthy. That should be on paper especially from a wealth perspective, bread and butter of traditional Republican voters. When I go in Clifton, I know a lot of people in Clifton from my time with the supervisor. I hear from those that I've known for years in the Clifton area that are religious Republican voters saying, time out, maybe I need to rethink this. And that ought to be sending warning bells to Republican leaders in not only Virginia, but in the country. But we're losing, I keep referring to we.
Right. It's hard. I know what you mean.
It's hard. It's just it's a
habit.
It's a habit. But the Republican Party is losing its traditional voters. There's a branding issue with the party. I mean, there is a fundamental branding issue, and just saying, well, you've always been a Republican voter, you should still be a Republican voter, doesn't really cut it.
But that's kind of been the thing that's been so difficult from the other side about Republicans. And there's an old saying that Republicans fall in line and Democrats fall in love, right? And I have found this to be true.
We say the opposite about you guys. They say the opposite about you guys, though.
So when again at the polls, I see older people will come out. Sure. Conservative Republican voters, they don't use the handicap space. They won't use they will, on their walkers, on their canes, they will park and go. They want to vote in person. They come out every time. But we are talking about the greatest generation and older boomers. And
Sure.
I mean, and that is the core, from what I can see here, that is the core of the Republican Party. Through attrition, how quickly is that going to shrink?
I think it is shrinking and is going to continue to accelerate in shrinking. It's funny you mentioned that, because how it was always told that Republicans view it was getting a Republican to vote for you is like herding cats, but getting Democrats to vote for Democrats is like herding sheep. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's actually
I hadn't heard
the
that.
opposite of what you just told me. But there are generational divisions, as with any other organization, right? I mean,
Right.
whatever membership organization you're talking about, there are generational gaps. There's demographic gaps in general, and it's going to continue to be a problem until the parties learn how to realign and how to grow and how to adapt.
And I think the other issue is diversity too. And I said, beyond, we're talking about age differences and generational differences, but you're right about the fact that we have a very diverse county. And Northern Virginia as a whole is very diverse. And so we have to be looking at how do you also open up your big tent and attract people who are from different ethnic communities, some of whom are new to Virginia and to the country.
Sure.
So when we come back from this break, we are going to be talking with Kyle McDaniel. He is a not even registered. He is newly independent here in Virginia. And he's going to be helping us to understand a little bit about his journey from being a Republican to being an independent. So please join us after this break.
Guess what? I have some news for you. There's free food right there, junk food. You see that truck? Oh, jeez. It's a 2 Michelin star chef. All for free, ladies and gentlemen. All for free.
Here we have a Panzanella with summer vegetables and pesto. Enjoy. How we doing?
Fantastic. So what do you got going on underneath that plate there?
This food is really about to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Bro? Is there something wrong with this food? Where did you get it from?
From farmers markets. They put aside the ugly vegetables and the ugly fruits.
Carrot top, soft avocados. It was all food that was going to be discarded.
Even the drink you had is made from like a little bruised peach. Did it taste a little bruised?
Great. It's good.
The average person throws away 24 pounds of food a month. That's a lot. Isn't that a lot? Go visit savethefood.com for more information. Thank you. Junk food time!
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Kyle McDaniel, known in this area now for being neither a Republican nor a Democrat, but truly independent. Thanks for joining me, Kyle.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the fact that you still consider yourself a conservative, and that is not something that has party labels. It really is more about core values.
Sure.
So, and I think there's a lot of people who are starting to agree with you that there's a way to go forward, to contribute, to stand for the things you believe in, whether you're standing with a party or without one.
Sure.
So how do you see yourself going forward and maintaining, you've been involved politically, and this doesn't mean you're stepping away from politics, I'm assuming, simply that you're doing your own gig.
Sure. Well, I'm stepping away from politics in, I guess, the organized sense. Involvement with political party, it can be rewarding. It can also be wearing. So,
And a time suck.
And a massive time suck. And as I told the Post, I'm looking forward to getting about 20 hours a week of my life back from not having to worry about party business. But I moved from all across the Southeast to Fairfax County back in 2003, almost 15 years ago now. And I truly fell in love with the community and the location and kind of the way of life. Driving is actually a stress reliever for me. It's just a way for me to kind of vent and have my own time to myself, so I don't mind the traffic that this area, has and normally wears on people. But I do love where I live and the community that it has. So, I've taken a step back from organized politics for the foreseeable future, but that doesn't mean that I've taken a step back from the community or Fairfax County in general. And what I want to do is focus my time and energy on things that make the county in particular a better place.
Well, the last time I interviewed you, which was several years ago, I interviewed you when you were representing the Springfield Chamber of Commerce. And we are both Rotarians. You're a member of the West Springfield Club. I'm the member of the Centerville Chantilly Club. And I actually think Rotary is a great example of how people come together who share core values, because certainly traditionally a lot of Rotary clubs have been thought of as more conservative. Some of the more established clubs have older members, and a lot of them tend to be conservative.
Sure.
My club is younger, more diverse in lots of ways, gender, ethnicity, everything. But we have both conservative and liberal people, and we are pretty out there about what we believe in and where we stand politically. But once a week, you sit down with people and you focus on other things. So talk a little bit about how the core values of Rotary have kind of affected your core values, and going forward too, whether some of this free time will be spent on things more directed at community projects.
Sure, and one of the benefits that I found to Rotary in my case, and I'm also in a Lions Club, but any really civic organization, is that when you show up and you start getting involved, politics isn't really, it's just not a thing. It's not discussed. I think those that are actively involved in the day-to-day politics and in the organized parties, that kind of starts to become their identity. And when you go to a civic association, like Rotary Club, for example, it's not about who's an R or a D or an I. It's about we're all here because we support a common theme, which is to make our community, whether it's here or across the world, a better place. And when you can shed the outward coat or the suit of an organized political party and just focus on doing good stuff for people, it really gives you a different perspective on life.
So I know that you and your wife, Katie, have done mission work to Haiti. So tell us a little bit about, how you have found that fulfilling in a way that also tied into sort of the straw that broke the camel's back with your leaving the party.
Sure. Yeah, we live in West Springfield, and we go to our local Methodist church there in West Springfield. And a couple of years ago now, the pastor decided to do a mission trip to Haiti. So we went, both she and I went, and then I went back last year by myself. She didn't go the second time. But we were in Port-au-Prince, working in the slums there in Port-au-Prince. Interestingly enough, we're working in a part of the city called Repatriate, where after the earthquake, decimated the island, a large contingent of Haitians were sent to the Dominican Republic. They just fled the Dominican Republic because they had nowhere else to go. The interesting part of this whole thing was that repatriate is where those who went to the Dominican were actually kicked out of the Dominican and sent back to Haiti because there's cultural friction there. So I say that's interesting because the entire reason that this slum exists is because the Dominicans got upset with the Haitians for immigrating to their country, so they kicked them out.
Right.
And they were resettled in a part of Port-au-Prince called Repatriate. So we went there, built 2 homes, and if you ever are feeling bad about yourself, or if you ever want a story of hope or something that's going to be uplifting, find a Haitian.
Right.
I mean, find a Haitian, and I don't mean that flippantly. I mean that with every ounce of sincerity, because no matter what happens to the Haitians or to that island or those people, no matter how many hardships they have gone through, they always find the silver lining. They love life and they bounce back. And that's what made me fall in love with the Haitian people.
My club has done dental medical missions to Haiti for 5 years. That's where Sarah John is right now. She's in Haiti. Our club has, worked collaboratively with 12 to 18 clubs in our district every year to fund these missions for 5 years. And so I'm on the same page with you. We have tremendously close ties with a village in Chantal, Haiti. And so we also kind of, as a club, I think, we're taken aback by the president's comments. I mean, it was just shocking anyway that a president would talk in those terms. But particularly Haiti is a country full of warm, lovely, wonderful people. So so tell me a little bit about, I'm not as familiar with the Lions Club. So is that, again, do they do international things or more local things?
Sure. I mean, it's extremely similar. I think the model is very similar to Rotary. Except, Rotary has an emphasis on ending polio. Lions have an emphasis on ending blindness and helping those who have trouble seeing, providing eyeglasses and things like that for them.
Well, that's very cool. And again, in your day job, you are out and about a lot, and you meet a lot of people. So have people questioned you much? Do they look at your name and they're like, "Oh my God, are you that guy?"
It's been interesting. The first week after, I had a couple of people, they read the Post or saw a local news channel and they asked me about it. And the interesting part was a lot of people that I just assumed were Republicans said, "We're in the same boat as you are." So when I said at the beginning of the program, I've rehashed this decision over and over again in my mind. It was surely the right decision, and I'm glad that I made it.
But in sort of refocusing, I don't see you stepping away entirely, and especially when it comes to elections for specific candidates. Sure. I'm assuming that you have relationships with a lot of current Republicans. All of us were surprised in November. On the Democratic side, we were just as surprised as anyone. What message do you think was there in the Commonwealth of Virginia with the outcome in those House races?
It was absolutely anti-Trump. I mean, there's no other way to look at it as anything other than anti-Trump. I mean, the wave was massive. I mean, you go from a House firmly in Republican grip for 2 decades to almost losing control, and it came down to picking a name out of a hat or a film canister or a bowl or whatever it was, by the State Board of Elections, the chairman down in Richmond. That wave doesn't just, that's not a cyclical, up and down type wave. That is a message that was sent, and both parties would do good to take some lessons from that.
So looking at 2019, because at this point we only have federal elections in 2018. So in 2019, are you up for a little prognosticating? Well,
sure.
It's a slim margin.
Sure.
The GOP is hanging on by 1 in both the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
Could it flip? Could it change hands?
Well, the silver lining of this election for the Republicans in Virginia was that the Senate was not on the ballot.
Right.
That was an absolute silver lining because I firmly believe control would have completely been flipped at the Senate. 2019, it's going to depend on. This is an obvious statement. It's going to depend on the turnout model. Is there the same angst against Trump in 2019 as there was in 2017, you don't have the governor on the ballot, so it's automatically going to be somewhat lower turnout model. Off your election, correct,
Right.
which is relatively unique to Virginia. So, I don't think it's going to be worse for Republicans. They could pick up some of the seats that they lost in some of the outer peripheral races of Northern Virginia. I could see them picking up some of the seats that they've lost. And it's interesting, if you look at some of the delegates, the Republican that lost, they haven't skipped a beat, really. Mm-hmm. And Rich Anderson comes to mind, because I'm friends with him on Facebook and I follow him. He has not skipped a beat. He is still out there around, active in the community. Someone like him, could he mount a re-elect type campaign, and could he be a very serious challenger? Absolutely, but it all comes down to that turnout model.
Yeah, and it also comes out to who is turning out. So women were turned on, tuned in, and turned up.
Right.
And that kind of made a difference too. Like I said, I saw families with kids show up at the polls, and that was a first.
Right.
So isn't it also about who stays engaged?
Right. Well, that's the trick within your Republican Party is you bring new people into the fold, and then the second step is capturing them and keeping them in that fold, and that'll be the key for Democrats in 2019, whether it's you're talking House of Delegate race, a Senate race, or local races, is how do you bring those who showed up in 2017 back out in 2019?
And you make a good point, because we have Board of Supervisor races in 2019 and school board. And so I think from a local level, that kind of sets us up for how things might shift locally. And I know you worked for Pat Harity and obviously still have a relationship with him. And I'm sure he is going to be running in 2019.
I assume.
Yes,
I believe so, yes.
And so it's interesting, and we're going to a break shortly, but when we're at this break, just give this some thought while we're on our break, is, how do you see things in Fairfax County, since we tend to be the bellwether for the rest of the state, things that are going to happen between now and in 2019 in Fairfax County, and how that could also either be to benefit or detriment of the GOP.
Sure.
Actually, to both parties, but one of the things that we'll touch on is the recent disruption over the ICE contract.
Sure. Okay.
So when we come back, we will be talking with Kyle McDaniel. He is newly independent here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we'll be talking a little bit about the ICE situation here in Fairfax County for those of you who have been following that. So please join us after the break.
For all the papas out there, let's stop what we're doing and take a moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, dorky moments. It doesn't really matter. Every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
Hey, did you know that 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Go to theshelterpetproject.org and search your local shelters and rescues. Go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can stop to make sure someone is okay.
We can warn someone when their drink isn't safe.
And disrupt the situation.
We can.
Get someone the cab.
Or walk them home safely.
We can make campuses safer for our friends.
Our roommates.
Our classmates. Our fellow human beings.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can.
Intervene.
It's on us.
All of us.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
When it comes to saving money,
Boss, what?
Harry! Don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting. This is so humiliating.
Be the boss.
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap. You were saying.
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips.
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
At feedthepig.org.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me tonight is Kyle McDaniel, independent Virginian. Thank you, Kyle, for being here.
I've been called worse than
See, I'm sure that's probably true. So when we went to break, we were talking about the situation that's caused a little bit of a kerfuffle here in Fairfax County about the ending of a contract with ICE. And the sheriff, Stacey Kincaid, made the decision to do this, which actually kind of puts her in alignment with 120 other sheriff departments in Virginia who also don't have a contract. But tell me your thoughts on this. I mean, you said you thought it was kind of insider baseball.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's one of those things where, if you go on the streets and you ask somebody about it, they're first going to probably scratch their head and say, what's ice? We're talking ice out of the ice machine. What do you mean ice here? And I don't mean that flippantly or insultingly. Right. I'm just saying people have more things, larger things that they're concerned about on a day-to-day basis than a contractual memorandum of understanding between the sheriff and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So I do think it's insider baseball. I think it's an issue that both parties are going to play up for their own respective, benefit.
Right.
But is there a significant shift with a major policy implication in this situation? I find it hard to believe.
And I think, but I do think there's so much opportunistic jumping on these issues, and on both sides. Sure. I mean, both parties do it. But somebody texted me and said, have you seen that Breitbart has picked up this article? And I'm like, well, I don't subscribe to Breitbart, so no, I haven't seen it, but I'll look for it. And so when a national publication starts to look at this and say, well, here's an example, aren't we all being played?
I mean, and it kind of goes back to a comment that I made earlier, the 24-hour news cycle. The problem with the 24-hour news cycle is it constantly has to be fed. And that means that editors and the people that have to sell advertisement space, whether it's online or in print, are constantly looking for the next greatest story to put up on a headline. This is one of those classic issues that the problem is it's hard to understand the facts. So it's easy for an editor or a journalist to spin it to be more simplistic than it actually is for whatever that editorial board's particular gain happens to be.
And what do there's so much talk about feeding the base, feeding the base, feeding the base. Mm-hmm. Who is the base? Is the base some fictional thing that somebody makes up? Because I don't see who these people, are they just trolls? Are we just feeding the trolls? Would that be a better way of saying it?
I mean, to a certain extent, right, it's like the self-licking ice cream cone. I mean, it's let's feed the base reads it and responds in a positive manner, let's feed it again. It's this never-ending vicious cycle on both sides. It's true, and this is one of the most, and I said earlier about being worn down in politics, it's just constant outrage. It's like people are searching for something to be outraged by.
I think you're right.
And the media plays into it, the parties play into it, and as John Q. Public, it's exhausting. Find something to be positive about that isn't, a splash headline.
I agree with you. I do. And I think, too, looking at going forward, especially for local issues, there are things that people could be focused on doing rather than talking about. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of time and energy expended on stuff that actually produces nothing of any value and actually is just relationship ending.
Sure.
So let's talk about specifically in Fairfax County, since we are both here in this county. I'm actually in Fairfax City. We have a majority Democratic Board of Supervisors and we have a majority Democratic school board. Mm-hmm. Do you see that changing? And what factors would have to happen for that to change significantly in the upcoming election in 2019?
Sure. Short answer is no. No way, no how. I mean, it would take seismic political shifts in order for that to change. I mean, the numbers from a Republican perspective are staggering. I mean, picking off a seat here and there is probably, I would consider the party to be lucky if they could pick off a seat here and there.
What are your thoughts on gerrymandering?
Gerrymandering is one of those things, it's a problem that there's really no good solution for, because every solution has its own other set of problems, and the only reason we like those solutions is because we haven't had to live with the problems that those solutions create. So, I know there's a large movement afoot in Virginia to have nonpartisan or independent redistricting, and that's fine. There's no problem having that discussion and exploring it, but, be careful what you wish for. Exactly, because it's going to create an entirely different set of issues that may or may not be worse than the issues we have now.
So we're looking at, when we talk about gerrymandering, we're talking about kind of on a state level, House and Senate districts. But what about within the county?
Locally, sure, yeah, and that's what a lot of people miss is Fairfax is a county of 1.2 million people, 9 magisterial districts, of which you're talking 140,000, 150,000 people in each district. That's bigger than a delegate district.
Right.
It's pushing the size of a state Senate district. And that is controlled strictly at the local level. And now Virginia, because it's an old South state still, the Old Dominion, still has to have Department of Justice approval for all of its redistricting. So the local government, the county board, when they redraw the lines, has to send it over to DOJ for approval. But I think the county board in Fairfax, and I can't speak anywhere else, they do a pretty good job of redistricting. They make minor tweaks here and there. They try to keep communities of interest together. And Fairfax is interesting because within it there's the independent city of Fairfax, there's the town of Herndon, there's the town of Vienna, and there's of course the town of Clifton. And the board has to balance those communities of interest while keeping together large swaths, large independent towns. You don't want to cut Herndon in 2 different districts, or Vienna.
No.
So it's a challenge. It's a large county, but I think if you look at the way the Board of Supervisors has done it, I think that they've done it in a pretty fair manner.
It's interesting, being a voting rights state, and we're one of however many that fall under the jurisdiction of having to have our districts reviewed because of the African American vote and packing. They call it packing and cracking.
Right.
In gerrymandering terms, redistricting terms. But in Northern Virginia, we have a very diverse population. It's not just about white voters and African American voters. I mean, there are communities, like I said, the Asian community, and that's the Vietnamese and the Korean, and that's Indians, and so there's East Asians, but there's people here from all over the world. There's a huge, Ethiopian population and lots of people who tend to cluster together because people move into neighborhoods with people that speak a familiar language. And our schools also reflect this kind of dynamic too. So within the Republican Party, I know that there are some groups within these ethnic groups that actually are drawn to the very conservative message. A lot of them tend to be evangelical. Drawn to the conservative message. Is this something you can see as an opportunity for the conservatives? And not talking about the GOP, because you are no longer a Republican, but you are a conservative. So who are the people who believe in these core conservative values?
Sure, and that's what, when I put in my letter, the state party chairman made a comment that, the party has been trying to reach out to minority communities, which I can't argue with. Unsuccessful they've been, but they've still been trying. And one of the challenges that the Republicans have faced is just from their approach and their messaging. It's always, you believe in this, this, and this, so therefore you should vote for us. It's never been, we believe in this, this, and this. What do we need to do better to convince you that we're the party you should be supporting? And it's a subtle difference, but it's a big difference. The one Republican that I will give props to, because I think he did a very good job trying to break into those communities, was Ed Gillespie. He did a very good job trying to go into those communities and listen to their concerns. And we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah. We
need to do more listening and talking. And the problem that the Republicans have the issue that they've committed is that they've done more talking than listening.
Right. So that's very interesting. You talk about Ed Gillespie sitting down and really wanting to hear from these communities. Is it a listening problem? I mean, is the conservative movement missing the core values? And I guess the other question is, do people see the GOP inextricably tied to Trump now?
Sure. Yes, and yes. There's the approach, there's the listening part. But at the end of the day, 2 years of extensive outreach into a minority community, whatever that minority group happens to be, can all be wiped out in a split second by whatever the president happens to tweet out. So that's a problem. And look, Trump is going to be president for 2 years, or excuse me, 3 years, up to a potential of 7 more years, just kind of depending. So that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing that there is a ending horizon at some point.
It will end.
The problem is you've got to get to that horizon before things get better.
So what about specific issues? And I'll bring this up because I sit on the board of Equality Virginia.
Sure.
And so that was an issue that did not comport with conservative values until it kind of did.
Sure.
And I see that a bit as a generational issue too. So I have a young Republican friend, Bobby McCurdy, who actually worked in Randy Minshew's office. And when I invited him to the Commonwealth dinner, he's like, sure, we'd love to come. And why wouldn't I come? And I'm thinking, okay, so, until marriage equality became the law of the land, there was a lot of resistance. Now I see that there's not so much resistance. Even bills about non-discrimination in employment and in housing seem to be kind of moving forward in Virginia. Mm-hmm. Are there other issues that you can see that the GOP might find a way to come more into the mainstream on?
Sure. I think, interestingly enough, immigration now, apparently the president supports Dreamers and DACA.
Today does.
Today does. But, in that specific example you gave, there was a massive, there was a massive generational divide, or just an age divide. It is what it is. And as natural attrition occurs and younger people come into the political fray, whether they pick a party or they don't, that's going to inevitably shape national policy and moods on that particular issue.
Any other issues besides, immigration, LGBT issues, anything else looming on the horizon?
It's going to be social issues. Inherently, I think it's going, because people, your strong emotions, the issues that cut through generations are going to be different issues that cut through political parties. So you're going to have friction, but that's also a place where you can find common ground, as you alluded to.
Right. So one of the things I want to talk about is the Conservative Party being the party that is pro-business.
Sure.
And so when we come back from this break,
Sure.
we are going to talk with Kyle McDaniel, the independent Virginian, about what it means to be pro-business from a conservative point of view. So please join us, and I think you will be enlightened by what Mr. McDaniel has to say about the conservative perspective on what is happening here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, especially since he is a member of the Springfield Chamber of Commerce currently.
And Northern Virginia.
In Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. How could I forget that? So please join us after the break.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is fundamental.
Checking your fantasy league?
Nah, just my 401k statement.
Nice. Where'd you find the money for that?
I just been saving a little every month.
I can't seem to save anything.
Well, what about all this? What about the money you're spending?
What money? It's gone before I can get my hands on it.
I got a pizza for a Todd.
Hey, can somebody spot me?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind.
It's 547.
Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me tonight is independent Kyle McDaniel, and we're going to be talking in this segment about business issues because conservatives, and you notice how I say conservative because conservative is not a party, it's a set of values.
Sure.
So let's say that there's a lot of conservatives out there who, like you, are like, yeah, I'm not them, I'm just this set of values.
Sure.
Tend to be pro-business, or kind of like we are pro-business, which kind of by implication makes it seem like Democrats aren't pro-business.
Sure.
But I think we all want a healthy and robust economy. Where have we gone off the mark, Kyle?
Sure.
In business, the economy, labor, unions, how come that doesn't fit together?
Yeah, I think, as we're talking at the break, I think, when you just say it again, when you boil it down to the little talking point, it's pro or anti-business. I mean, pro-business inherently implies there's an anti-business side. I don't know of many people that are anti-business or anti-companies or anti-private sector. That just doesn't really make sense. It's not really a coherent thought. As business owners and as a member of Chamber of Commerce, sure, there's a selfish interest, but at the same time, there's an interest in a healthy overall economy, and you cannot have massive divides in wages and labor and expect for the economy to be healthy in general. You can't have that. There has to be balance.
So when you say pro business, we all want a robust, healthy economy. But is there competing interests as far as labor and employees and business owners and shareholders?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be competition. There's always going to be a give and a take. There's always going to be one group, in this group and these other groups, and they're always going to be, pulling and pushing against each other. But that's life.
But do you think that there's an inherent bias against labor unions?
I think when you hear the phrase union or the word union, I think for a lot of people that conjures up a preconceived notion, whether it's a positive preconceived notion or negative preconceived notion. That just depends on the person. I mean, as a former Republican, it was most assuredly negative notions, but it's like I've noted to a couple people, unions aren't bad. Bad unions are bad, but unions inherently, in and of themselves, are not bad. It just depends on how they go about trying to achieve their goals. It's the same thing with business owners. Business owners aren't bad. Bad business owners are bad. It just depends on the approach that particular person takes.
I think that's a very realistic distinction. Let's talk about supporting working families. Mm-hmm. So wage stagnation started back in the 1970s. We've seen a decline in the middle class. I don't think there's anybody who's going to refute the fact that there's been a decline in the middle class. We need for people to be able to earn enough money to do things like buy a home, send their kids to school, pay their bills, get health care. That's a big one. But when both parents work, and in Northern Virginia, and particularly in Fairfax County, it's almost impossible for both parents not to work. But from a conservative point of view, is there a focus on things like paid family leave or quality affordable day care or issues that working families with children depend on?
Sure. And yes, there is. And one of the interesting things was after the election results came out, Speaker, at the time Speaker designee Cox, announced that the General Assembly would be offering enhanced paid family leave policies for General Assembly employees. The short answer is yes, that is a growing part of our Republican Party, the conservative mindset. And it is rooted in something that you alluded to, which is the strong family unit. A strong, healthy family. Strong, healthy families make strong, healthy economies. And all too often, we've forgotten that, families aren't just a line on a balance sheet. They're people, and they have a lot of different dimensions to them. And we need to put in place policies that help them succeed in life.
And so, as a conservative, can you see yourself working on those kinds of specific issues even without a party behind you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Is this something that you can see the chamber getting behind, supporting either one of the chambers you're involved with, issues supporting working families, specifically these kinds of paid family leave, sick days. I mean, these things just aren't on the books, and child care increasingly has become both scarce and unaffordable.
Sure. I mean, any business owner knows that the organization is only as good as their employees. You want, dedicated employees, happy employees, smart, capable, productive employees. And as long as it's not a detriment to the organization overall, as a business owner, you want to do the most you can to help people succeed in life, whether it's between the hours of 9 and 5 or after the hours of 9 and 5.
So as far as is attracting younger conservatives, would this be a path forward to finding conservative women who are drawn to these values because they also are realistic, real world attempt to address the things that directly impact them? I mean, we talk a lot about the divide between the parties being around social issues.
Sure.
But there are economic issues that I think are becoming rapidly far more pressing than the social issues. So isn't the party who figures out how to best address those needs going to come out with the additive benefit of growing their members?
Sure. No, I'd agree with that. I mean, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, ideally both of them come together and come up with a grand solution that would be great.
Awesome.
It passes Congress, 435 to nothing. But I mean, fundamentally, we as a country and as a culture have always, prided ourselves on the American dream, right? It's a house with a white picket fence, and the family unit. That's always been a fundamental part of America. And whatever policies we need to put in place to protect that and to promote that, I think those are fundamentally pro-America. We're talking pro and anti, pro-America policies.
So I'm going to throw out this hypothetical. It's not actually hypothetical, It's real. But I just want to get your take on this. So for the third year in a row, there's been a bill proposed that would prohibit homeowners associations from creating covenants that would prohibit child care homes, right?
Sure.
So that actually went into committee hearing today. I have no idea whether it was killed again or made it out. But we don't know the outcome, but I'm just throwing this out to you. HOAs, you can't have a child care home in this neighborhood. Is that something you see as being pro-family, pro-economy, and pro-business?
No, don't ever give HOAs more power than they already have. I mean, because it's a tiny fraction that ultimately control those decisions. And in Virginia and Fairfax County, a lot of HOAs they're mini towns or mini cities. I mean, they make very serious consequential decisions. Ultimately, as a conservative, I would tend to, come down the side of the actual property owner. Assuming that there aren't extraneous issues that are an exception to the rule.
Right, but if they met other zoning requirements.
Right, they meet those zoning requirements. I mean, Fairfax County extensively regulates home child care facilities, as they should in their kids. They absolutely should have to meet requirements. And as long as they meet those requirements, I would not give HOAs the power to implement more onerous regulations on top of that, because they're already pretty onerous.
They are, and they're actually shutting down child care homes.
Right.
And again, this is in a climate where there's not enough affordable, reliable, quality licensed child care to begin with. So I've taken to calling this the tyranny of powerful associations.
Sure.
But I mean, when I think about that, I think about the status quo and the grip that the status quo has. When something's working and you don't want it to change, then you are going to double down to make sure it doesn't change. How would you, from a conservative perspective, advise getting past that? How do you break the power of associations?
Specifically of HOAs?
HOAs, but just in general. I mean, long-standing associations of any kind are entrenched, and they really invest a great deal in making sure that things don't change.
Sure. Well, every journey starts with the first step. When I worked for Supervisor Haiti, one of the main issues that I tackled was actually child care regulations, because there was different proposed regulations coming down the pipes, and we fought pretty hard to get those reduced and make them a little more reasonable. I was very proud of that work because we hosted a town hall at the Government Center in the main auditorium, and I don't think I've ever seen a town hall where the Government Center auditorium was packed to the brim and overflowing of people that were there to provide child care, and some of these regulations would have had the potential of shutting them down and putting them out of business. And that's not to say that there's not room for reasonable regulations, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to overregulate to an extent that it just forces people underground.
I agree.
And to go dark.
I agree, and that's one of the things that worries me about, and worries a lot of people about the whole HOA situation. Right. If you can't have a licensed child care provider providing it, then unlicensed people are doing it, and that doesn't benefit anyone. It creates a terrible situation. And Fairfax County's had the Office for Children, gosh, since the 1970s, 74 or something. And we are fortunate in that we really have figured out how to do it well, and I wish the rest of the state could see or replicate the model that has been created here. There's a lot of things about what's been done in Fairfax County that really is, you have every reason to be proud of the work that you did with Supervisor Harity's office, but just in general, it's a great county. And we've done a lot of things really well. It is a place where a lot of people want to live, work, and play. And I think there's room for both conservatives and people in different parties. And I think ultimately we want to go forward focused on how we make life better for everybody. Anything that you would like to add in your newly independent status about how you see your future?
No. My wife and I bought a house about a year ago in West Springfield. We're there. We're both, enjoying life. And, people have asked, are you going to run for office, or are you going to join a party or any other? I am honestly, in every sense of the phrase, I'm looking forward to having time back and just taking a total pause from politics for the foreseeable future.
There you go. More time to shovel the snow, mow the lawn.
Yeah, all those fun adult things that you've got to do.
Yeah, being a homeowner brings you, right?
Being an HOA, yeah. Yep.
Well, I can't thank you enough.
Sure.
It's been great. I appreciate you coming on to be on the show, to talk with viewers about the things that you care about, that I care about, that all of our viewers should care about. Thanks so much for joining Inside Scoop. You heard it here first from Kyle McDaniel, newly minted Virginia independent thinker. Join us next week on Inside Scoop.